Right. Making sure. So let's start here. What would, and if anyone would like to share, go for it, but what would optimal growth look like, sound like, feel like for you or your family from trauma? What would optimal, like, just even if it's just one of those, you don't have to do all three, but if you're just like, if there's something right off the top of your head, like, gosh, I just want this.
Life balance?
Yeah, life balance.
I think what's most important in a family is communication. I think that I was talking to someone this week, and we were conversating, and I told her, well, you know, back in the day, you know, we used to sit at the table. We used to be there, not be on our phone or a tablet, you know, or just distracted with TV, and it was more interaction. What happened to you in school? How did work go? You know, how are you feeling?
Human connection.
Yes.
Knowing you're cared about.
Yes, and families would know each other, you know, they will have more interaction, they will have more in common. But these days, it's different. Everyone has to work 2 or 3 jobs, not be there at dinner time or lunchtime, and everybody eats wherever they want, they eat different food, and they talk to somebody else on the phone or chat or whatever.
I wrote down here my notes, communication in community. Like that, yeah, that 1,000,000%, because most traumatized people like to stick to themselves. And stick away from me. So yeah, that would look like optimal growth. Like, hey, I actually have steady friends. I know that like I have 5 friends in my life who I know I can call at any moment, and typically people who've been through trauma, you've got a revolving set of 5 friends you've had throughout your entire life that never actually, maybe 1 or 2 stick, but.
Reactions. Reactions to things that are happening to me. The more I grow with my trauma and heal from it, the more I notice that my reaction to constructive criticism, anything in that manner, has sharpened and got better. My responses aren't so negative. They aren't so, I'm more open to it.
More less offensive?
Yeah.
I get offensive.
Less confrontational about it.
Amen. Oh, this is all such good.
Like being more self-aware, like let's say you are experiencing anxiety, like making like sure like, okay, it's coming, all right, how am I gonna prepare for it? Like how am I gonna deal with it? Like
You guys are all describing to a T what post-traumatic growth is. So like
Such good students.
I couldn't be more excited. Let's do this just for time's sake. Remember, these are the 5 foundational truths that we work on with each session. You are a spire person. There's 5 elements to you that if any one of them is tainted or damaged, it taints and damages the whole person. You are a spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional person. And if, again, one thing gets messed up, the rest gets messed up. Bad news, so this is what we talked about earlier, right? Pain and suffering, unavoidable, and it will take a toll. None of us are exempt from it. We will all experience it no matter what. But the good news is, and this is what we talked about right at the beginning, is that trauma is a script and it can be controlled at the end of the day. And part of the control of it is that reactional piece, is that self-awareness piece. It's recognizing trauma when it comes to, or it's pain and suffering when it comes to mitigate the actual traumatic results. Pain can be repurposed as a gift. That's what post-traumatic growth is all about. And the trauma in your life has the greatest potential of being your greatest source of growth. And again, that's what post-traumatic growth is all about. So,
can you explain what that phrase particularly means?
which one?
The pain can be repurposed as a gift.
Yes. So I'll use it anecdotally first because we're going to dive through it, and like this is what the whole session's about. Anecdotally, or for my own personal life, an example I can share is my dad was killed, and my wife had cancer when she was 18. We went through 5 years of infertility and had 3 miscarriages along the way. Easily the 3 most painful events in my life, I'm thankful for them. If they had not happened in my life, I don't know who I would be. I don't know where I would be, but those moments, as much as they hurt in the moment, after a season and a time of discernment, reflection, and real self-work, it turned into, man, you know what, in a weird way, if I didn't have this, I wouldn't have all these other really good things in my life. So it can be, it's painful in the moment, and it's not saying it can be transformed. No, it's always going to be pain, but it can be purposed differently. You can shift its functional use in your life. And again, that's what post-traumatic growth is all about. So let's go back to Johnny. All right, and I want to, you had markers, right? Yeah. So the term that I want you to be thinking of as we go through this is the term assumptive world. I brought this up last week, but and don't worry, that'll change again. The assumptive world, and it comes from where the people who created our study that we're going to be dealing with tonight, that they're the people who coined this term. But assumptive world is the way you assume it should be, right? How everything should go, how everything should operate, and usually trauma happens when there's a toxic sort of contamination to our assumptive world. And so if we take the Spire thing, right, Johnny, good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people, right? God operates with the golden rule. Treat others as you should be treated, and that's how it should work. The whole idea of karmic justice, right? Physically, if I take care of myself, I won't be sick, I won't be disabled. If I take care of my body, it will take care of me. Intellectually, given reason, science, and common sense, right, we have the ability to truly answer any question in the universe if we seek long and hard enough. In fact, we can know things objectively for the most part, unless it has to do with religion, which I won't go down that rabbit hole. But relationally, right, give respect to get it. My friends and family want what's best for me, vice versa. Friends and family stick around and help each other. We all kind of assume, but this is Johnny, who's maybe a typical traumatized person. And then emotionally, right, put good vibes and energy into the universe, and you'll get positivity back to you. Right? If I just keep light, if I just always am nice, like I'll receive bad things.
Good thing.
Good things. Sorry, I was going to the next thing in my head.
Mr. Brewer listening.
So again, I'm a pastor, so a big part of my worldview is based on the Bible and God's Word. And so what I love about two books of the Bible is Proverbs is a book, it's all about wisdom literature. And it says A plus B equals C, over and over again. This is how the world works. And then Ecclesiastes comes in next and says, I call BS on all of that. A plus C equals B, and A plus C equals 45. Sometimes none of this stuff makes sense. Right? And so this is where post-traumatic growth starts, is when, think about an earthquake, right? Something totally and completely messes up your assumptive world, and then this is what ends up happening. Right? Well, I don't even have categories to think about this because never in my wildest dreams did I think this could happen to me physically, this could happen to me relationally, and then we just are left with this question, okay, what now? Right? How do I rebuild? And will things ever get back to normal? And the bad news is, I want to say is, no, it will never get back to normal. And I think that's part of the reaction, the self-awareness, everything. So we have to realize, and you'll see with one of the handouts that I gave you, is what trauma does is it invites a new normal for us to engage in. We don't have what we had before. We have to actually consider the fact that everything has changed. And so now we have to rebuild an assumptive world. And we have to start the building block one by one of saying, okay, it didn't work this way, and the pain comes is how long has that assumptive world been built? And how long has it been depended on? All right, so growing begins with knowing. And so here's if there's anything else that you take away from this session, because there is a lot of content, a lot of information, I think this is one of the most important slides. We don't just want resilience from your pain and suffering, right? You don't just want to take trauma and say, all right, I can go on. I can keep what I said to my counselor, right? Yeah, the whole world can fall apart. I'll figure out a way to survive. It's a good thing to have. We want to build that, but that's not the end goal. We don't just want hardiness, which is that tending towards commitment, control, and challenge in response to life stressful. Like, I'm going to be what's that old time parable? I am the master of my fate, something my destiny. I'm in control of my destiny, right? That's what hardiness is. I'm going to take this pain and I'm going to do whatever I want with it because I can commit to it, I can have control, I can challenge it. We don't want just optimism, which is where we look at pain and suffering and then put like a light hue or filter on top of it, like it's all fine, it's all good. No, it is pain and suffering. We need to see it as such. And we don't just want a sense of cohesive self or well-being, right? Of everything's just Zen and Buddha and we're all chill. But what we are looking for is anti-fragility. Anti-fragility is this idea where, think about a trampoline. A trampoline is a fragile system. You put weight onto it, and then as soon as that weight comes off, it eventually returns back to where it started. An anti-fragile system is something that when it gets pressure put onto it, it actually grows from it. Humans, our autonomic nervous system, our physical system, we are anti-fragile systems and creatures. Think about working out. That's what working out is. You break the muscles down, put stress on it so that they can grow. Same thing happens biologically, same thing happens neurologically. We are anti-fragile beings, and so we want to look for that, not just avoid these things or push through them. And then ultimately what the term is post-traumatic growth. All right? And the simplest, shortest definition of it is allowing stress as a motivator. Pain, suffering, allowing that thing to coexist with growth and to cause growth, not to treat them as separate entities. They need to, if you've ever seen like the yin and the yang symbol, that's what post-traumatic growth is. It's a growth mindset with the pain and the suffering inextricably linked to it and actually helping define each one and the other.
Sometimes things happen in life that we just can't control. Sometimes they are good things, but sometimes they are bad things. Failures, challenges, mistakes, they happen to the best of us. Today I want to introduce you to a completely new way of thinking about the bad things that happen to us. Specifically, this is a concept called post-traumatic growth. If you or someone you care about has gone through a difficult experience, then this is a video you have to watch. We hear a lot about the devastating effects of PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, but researchers Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun discovered an interesting phenomenon that can happen after someone experiences a trauma. Specifically, they found that people often report 3 ways in which their psychological functioning increases after a challenge. These are ways that our mind can grow after adversity. Post-traumatic growth, or PTG, refers to the positive mental shift experienced as a result of adversity. Tedeschi found that across a wide range of negative experiences, as many as 90% of survivors report at least one PTG benefit. PTG does not say that trauma is not destructive and challenging. It does not imply that victims should be able to simply bounce back to a normal life after adversity. Rather, PTG evidence shows us that over time, people can reap benefits from their challenges. Post-traumatic growth holds a very important idea. We don't bounce back from challenges, we bounce forward. There are some specific areas that researchers have found change after adversity. First, relationships. Some people describe that they come to value their friends and family more deeply after a trauma and don't take people for granted. There is also often an increased sense of compassion and longing for more intimate relationships. Second, self-esteem. While some might think that experiencing trauma might make you feel like a victim, many people feel that their challenge gave them a deeper inner wisdom, personal strength, and gratitude. Trauma can even help people be more accepting of their vulnerabilities and limitations. Third, meaning. Trauma can radically change and re-engineer people's life perspective. Oftentimes, after a challenge, individuals reevaluate their purpose and mission, becoming less materialistic and more able to live in the present. If you have experienced a trauma or major adversity and you want to begin to bounce forward, there are a few elements that are known to contribute to post-traumatic growth. First, don't diminish your response to the adversity itself. You have to go through a difficult emotional processing period before bouncing forward. You can think of this like grief. You have to be able to mourn and feel before moving on. Second, the researchers have found that we have to share and talk about the adversity to process it fully. They call this constructive self-disclosure. Bottling up any trauma often leads to a worsening of symptoms, so find a safe place to share the story and effects of your adversity. Lastly, look at how your personal strengths got you through this trauma. How did you handle it well, and what have you learned from this experience? Your number one personal strength is that nothing can stop you. Right now, you're watching this video with me. You are surviving. You're moving towards recovery. You don't bounce back, you bounce forward. I hope this message reaches you and anyone who needs it. If you know someone who might need to see this video, please send it their way with a hug from us. That's it today from the Science of People. Thanks for letting us join you on your journey.
A bird's eye view of it, right? And so we're going to kind of talk about the specifics of it. She talked about this. It's a theory it was back in 1995. This was just a theory that was proposed of saying, hey, we're starting to see that, as we do clinical research, that we're starting to see that most people who've gone through difficult things, and we talked about from a biological perspective, they actually end up being better if they can set their mind to becoming better. And so they ended up, in 1995, they published their first findings, and then in 2002, after a bunch of people had some time to respond to it, they came back and they doubled down. They said, because some people affirmed it, some people pushed back, but the things that were pushing back, they weren't actually addressing what they were focused on. And so these are just some quotes from what they came up with. It describes the experience of individuals whose development, growth, at least in some areas, has surpassed what was present before this trauma, before the struggle with crisis occurred. That's what post-traumatic growth individuals look like. The individual has not only survived, but has experienced changes that are viewed as important and that go beyond what was previously the status quo. Post-traumatic growth is not simply a return to baseline, and it's an experience of improvement that's for some persons is deeply profound, anti-fragility, right? We're not just turning back to level ground. And then post-traumatic growth refers to a change in people that goes beyond an ability to resist and not be damaged by highly stressful circumstances. It involves a movement beyond pre-trauma levels of adaptation. That self-awareness we're talking about. How do we know before it even strikes? And so this is, again, right from their study, right from their findings, they said this is what post-traumatic growth looks like. Now again, it was considered by many to be more than just a theory. A lot of people thought it was just a theory, but if we actually look historically and empirically, meaning data-driven, this is what they said. Although it's not prevalent in either clinical or research settings, there's been a very long tradition of viewing human suffering as offering the possibility for the origin of significant good. Just in ancient literature alone, the ancient Hebrews and Greeks, totally different worldviews. Their wisdom literature came up with the same stuff. Early Christian teachings, Hinduism, Buddhism, even some elements of Islamic teaching, all different religions talk about how suffering can actually be a gift. Earlier, and this is a quote they said, earlier philosophers in the earlier centuries, novelists, dramatists, poets, there is something which are trying to understand the meaning of human suffering, and you wouldn't try and understand it if there wasn't something valuable if it was just something to be avoided, you'd completely avoid it. And then, I don't need to bore you with this, but there's 20th century philosophers, they all started to catch up and say, okay, we're starting to see something here. And then when it came to the 21st century and current clinicians and scientists, to what you had said, everyone knows this is a thing now. Everyone knows trauma is rampant, and everyone knows there is a path to, because we see two different types of people, or three different. We see the people who stay stuck in just survival mode, we see the people who self-destruct, and we see the people who grow. So there is some sort of pattern, there is some sort of script here that we can be working with. And so what they ultimately concluded was that the evidence is overwhelming that individuals facing a wide variety of very difficult circumstances experience significant changes in their lives that they view as highly positive. So it is a thing. And I know it sounds like a lot to just be able, but it's important that we actually go, hey, this isn't just theory, right? This is historical, this is empirical, there's evidence for it. This is when you can look at your sheet. So the first look at the yellow one, the colored one first. So these are the 5 lifestyle indicators, okay? So these are only things that you personally can judge, right? This is how we know someone is experiencing post-traumatic growth. They have a greater appreciation of life and a changed sense of priorities, right? Maybe things that mattered to us before no longer matter, and we appreciate every day a little bit more. We have warmer and more intimate relationship with others. That's what you were talking. Communication and community, right? Being able to actually have people that we love and spend time with, not just being on our own. Greater sense of personal strength. I think that's especially with people who are traumatized, we have a really hard time finding what we're good at, and if we know what we're good at, we have a really hard time owning it and actually acting it out. Recognition of new opportunities and paths in life that there's not a ceiling, right? That there's an infinite amount of possibilities that is actually open to you. It's just whether or not you actually can see them and walk down them. Most people who are traumatized and have that victim mindset think that's all that it is for me, and they just kind of resign themselves to that. And then the last one is growth in spiritual development. And again, recognize it doesn't say growth in Christian spiritual development or anything. It's spiritual. When I say you're an aspired person, spirituality, and we'll see this in our last session, it's more or less having a purpose and meaning in life. What are you living for? Who are you living for? What do you submit to? What do you serve? What do you worship? And it doesn't have to necessarily be God, but I mean, the growth in these areas, post-traumatic growth means that you're actually taking a step outside of yourself and looking at the bigger picture. Even if it's just one level past my own mind, just growth in spiritual development saying, I'm gonna just look outside of myself for more than 5 seconds. Feel free to stop me at any point, ask questions. But those are like the lifestyle indicators, only things that you can kind of judge for yourself.
And these indicators would show that you have moved toward post-traumatic growth.
Yes.
And you're not stuck.
Exactly. And so where these are really helpful, when I say growing begins with knowing, these are the goals we're reaching for. Mm-hmm. And so that's where these are the things where you can know, okay, do I have these things? If I do, then maybe in some areas you've actually had some growth already. And it's okay to learn to give up the survival skills. But if you haven't, it's like, okay, this is what we're aiming for. Right? This is how we know post-traumatic growth has taken place in our lives. Because I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, these 5 things have not been present in my life for a good period of time. And so yeah, so these are, and it doesn't have to be all 5. Remember from the video she said it's just 1 to 3, really. That is at the very least the starting point. And then we have 7 behavioral indicators. And I kind of simplified the language on the sheet. But first, and so this is what it looks like. This is what it sounds like and feels like. An extroverted and open personality, not just a shell of yourself. It doesn't mean that so if you're an introvert, don't worry. It doesn't mean all of a sudden you have to become the life of the party. It's just saying you can be open to not allowing introvertedness to define you in a social setting. I can open myself. I can throw myself out there and be more available to people and to experiences and opportunities. And that goes with number 4 in the previous slide, just having an awareness that there are more opportunities out there for you. Ability to manage distressing emotions in crisis, Tina. Having to, that reaction, like, okay, something happens where usually you'd see red and flare up and just lose it and go off the handles. Being able to actually stop for a second and pick plan B or C, that is a behavioral change that leads to post-traumatic growth. Supporting and disclosing, the ability to craft and share a narrative. She talked about this. This is why it's, and Angelica, this is why it's so important what you said. We need to be able to, and if you remember from last week, what happens in the brain, from the left brain, right brain, is a traumatized person is able to store more information creatively and process it, but not be able to use the language of tool to be able to actually get it out. And so it's so important to not only be able to have the skills to be able to craft a narrative, craft your story, here's what happened to me, not blank out, but it's equally important to have someone sit down and listen to you. One is not more important than the other, it's an even split. You need to be able to disclose what's inside, and you need to be able to have someone that's willing to actually hear it and actually help you shape the narrative, because that gets to what we were saying earlier, defining reality. Sometimes we don't know how to do that, and so we need other people to help us go, that wasn't normal, that wasn't right.
And part of that, whenever I'm with someone, first thing I say to that person is, this is a safe space.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really critical when you're sharing your story.
And this is where, for you, if you're in the middle of ongoing trauma right now, be picky with who you share your story
It's
with.
gotta be a safe space.
Because if you're not picky with it, And if you're really going through it, it can add more trauma to your life if you don't know how to emotionally regulate it properly. So that's where it is important to find a safe person, because if you're gonna just start blabbing everything out, and I literally just had a conversation with someone. So when my dad was killed, if anyone's ever had a loss of a family member suddenly and tragically, one of the most frustrating things that ever happens is the people at the funeral who say, I'm always there for you. Just call me whenever, any time of the day, okay, sounds good. I remember I called someone and they specifically told me, yeah, I said at the funeral, I'm actually pretty busy, I'm not gonna be able to be available for you. Then I chatted with someone else whose dad just died recently. She's 23 years old, and she said, yeah, my cousin said that. She said, hey, call me at any time. And then I called her and she was, actually it's a bad time. And then the next day she calls me and says, actually, your dad's death is affecting me a lot more than I thought it would. I'm not emotionally available for you, like, anymore. And that just destroyed her. And you know what? Here's the thing. It's not her cousin's fault for that. It wasn't a wise thing to say before, to promise, and it wasn't a wise reaction. But again, from what we said earlier, they're both going through it. It's really important to find someone that you know, they're gonna sit down and listen to me. And I'll just tell you right now, for Hillside, we have this thing called Church Assistance Program, where Pine Rest, as long as you say, hey, Hillside sent me here, you get 3 free counseling sessions, no questions asked, any day of the week. So if you don't have a safe place, that's a starting point. Talk to me. I will seriously, like, it's not like oh yeah, that might be cool. Like, literally, if you go tomorrow and just say, yeah, Pastor Eric from Hillside sent me, you get 3 free sessions, no questions asked. But this is a really important part, is being able to figure out how to tell your story and having someone listen to it.
So Eric, the place that I used to work at, the women's shelter, I found that the women going through some of the trauma would just want to tell everybody. And I don't know if that's just trying to build a community of support around her, or like they were indiscriminate. They just told everybody. Like,
It's both and, because you know what, my wife deals with the same frustration with me. Like, my wife has had to really like rein me in, because all of a sudden it's like I'm meeting a stranger at Barnes & Noble and I'm telling them about how my daughter was born 11 weeks early in Florida, you know, while we were on vacation, within 30 seconds. There's something that happens with traumatized people where you need to get it out.
okay.
It needs to come out, but that's part of the growth, is recognizing, no, it doesn't always need to come out. It needs to be reined in, and it needs to be directed positively.
Well, I would also think of that to be a safe space for them finally too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
think
they're
I
probably like,
think
oh,
Yeah.
now I can let out.
Yeah.
Because that's not a room full of people that are saying, oh yeah, let me tell you about what I went through and blah blah blah. It's,
Yeah, that's
you know, and so often with traumatized people, it's comparison Olympics of, oh yeah.
Yeah,
I
and I
can
think
follow
that,
that,
yeah, I think that's a piece of
Yeah.
it right there too.
So my question, is it possible to improve or in one trauma and not in everyone systematically? Like, I can get better. I can see myself doing some of this with some topics, let's say, but not with everything.
Yep, and we'll talk about that in the next 2 sessions specifically. The one example I'll give you is I've had a lot of growth from my my dad's death, you know, like in terms of what does it mean to be a husband and a father, because I did not have good examples and he died prematurely. I have grown significantly out of those. I still really struggle with the idea of God being communicated like a father in my religious setting. It's like, I still haven't grown out of that yet. Like, I still really struggle with the fact that God as a father is somehow loving, and that's a good thing. Like, I'm still working through that as a pastor. So yeah, and not only that, it's not like once you've grown, all of a sudden there's this safe floor that gets put underneath you that will never fall again. You could easily fall again, but it's constantly trying to, happiness and well-being is never a destination, it's always a spectrum, right? And you're always you're not in control of the thing that tries to push it negatively, but you are in control of sort of like that governor of how far it actually goes negative. But yeah, no, you can be, so when I say you're an aspired person, I actually think so much of where minimally traumatized, medium, and or healthy people end up destroying their lives, because they have one area in their life that is full of a ton of trauma. And they're like, that's fine, I'm just going to compartmentalize that. You know, I got sexually abused as a kid, but then I got adopted, I got out of that, so I don't ever have to deal with that ever again. And so all these other areas of my life are totally fine, when in reality, that one area is still affecting the entire whole person if you don't deal with it. That session 4, which we can still ask questions about it, so go for it.
My question was just like, so where I struggle is that, say you're already noticing that you have the 5 lifestyle indicators of post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
But then you're like, okay, life is chill now, like I'm actually feeling like really happy and things are going well, and yes, I appreciate life and have a changed sense of priorities and everything is good. But it's like this little teeny tiny voice in your head is like, no, not everything is okay, like you need to be worried about something right now. And it's like, well, life is going really well.
Yep.
So how do I like tell this little voice to be quiet?
Yeah, I would actually say don't. I think that's actually a healthy thing, and I'll show you why in just a second. I think that's actually a really healthy perspective to have, because most people who don't take that perspective get surprised by trauma and get surprised by pain and suffering when it comes, and then it ends up causing pain and suffering. We trick ourselves into thinking that anxiety is always a bad thing. Anxiety is what says don't put your hand on the fire. Anxiety says what says don't drive on the left side of the road. You know, it's something bad might happen. So the problem is I think over time, and again, that's where it's incremental and it's progressive. The first step of growth might feel like, maybe for the first time in your life, you feel like, oh, it's fine. I'm cool, I'm content. But then that little voice starts going, okay, the next step of growth is maybe that little voice goes 10 hours a day. Let's try and get it to 9. Let's try and get it to 8. Let's try and get it, and over time, to where, because it's not just mentally, there are physical things that have to get put into place as well. But we'll get there, and there's a very specific category for it that I think you'll appreciate. Fourth, growth in cognitive processing, and that's just the ability to take in information, to use it, right, and to act. So this is the best way I say this is, you know, if you've been through trauma, it's hard to say this with a straight face, but it's also something that we know intuitively. Think about the person who you hate most in this life. They did not wake up this morning saying, how can I make that person's life worse? How can I destroy that person today? They most likely woke up saying, how can I live? How can I survive? How can I feel better about myself? And then some intrusive thought came in, and then they crafted a narrative that wasn't healthy and said, okay, attack this person. So to be able to take in information to say, because it's so easy for us when we feel victimized for someone to cause an offense and to be like, this is exactly why they did it, this is why they meant it, this was their intention. To be able to have a growth in saying, I'm sure they did not mean to make me want to kill them. But that's what happened, so how do I deal with this? That's a behavioral indicator. Ability, well, and it goes with the exact same thing, ability to reject ruminating negative and basically repeated negative thoughts. And I hate to say this, the only way you do this is by stopping it, is by choosing something else. I think I'm a hothead, okay? I have an anger problem, I'll gladly admit it. And you know, my wife will tell me, once I get to the point of seeing red or frustrated, this is where I live. I'm just living over the exact same negative message in my head, whether or not there's been resolved. It's just, nope, I feel this way, I feel this way, I feel this way. So I keep living there, I keep living there. The ability to reject it is what post-traumatic growth looks like, to not constantly have that one thought in your head of this is why my spouse or my friend is a horrible person. It's being able to put the stick in the spoke and say, let's rethink this. Regular and reliable disclosure, talked about this already, to a trusted external person. So that first one is the ability to actually share your story. This is the finding the safe person, right? Making sure you actually find, and it says external support system. So outside, because the system that you currently have if you're traumatized is clearly not a good external support system. So, and that's why, again, it's so important for us to teach these classes here at Streams, because you've got umpteen opportunities to find an external support system just by showing up here. And then last thing is wisdom and narrative development, and really what it is just, this is what happens. Yeah, of course, this sounds, please, usually when I'm in a room full of people who are dealing with trauma, I recognize I don't have to step on so many eggshells, but I think about and so if I cross the line, please feel free to say so. But like when George Floyd died, right? George Floyd died, There were tons of churches putting out statements about that specific incident. And I remember talking with someone afterwards and saying, I think this is horrible, I think this is evil, I think we should mourn, lament, grieve, yes, but it's gonna happen again next week. Someone's gonna get shot by the cops. It's probably gonna be a black person, it's probably gonna be a minority. And are we gonna put statement out after statement? Are we gonna keep having this reaction to this event over and over again? Or at what point do we say there's evil in the world? And we can't get rid of it, but I can do my small part, my story can play one small part into helping this entire big picture that we got going on. It's being able to step back and look at the bigger picture and go, yeah, I may have an individual story, but my individual story doesn't change the world overnight. There's a lot more at stake here. Okay, I'm gonna go through this real quick, so I'll get to the 3 things that are important. The uniqueness, complexity, and requirements. This is why post-traumatic growth is so interesting. It has its rightful critics. Okay, I would be remiss if I didn't say that. Because the context, culture, and individual factors in an individual's life, it is an inexact science, right? But Tedeschi and Calhoun, the guys who commissioned this, they admitted it's not an exact science. They didn't say it's a cookie-cutter approach. The process is as complex as the individual, which every individual is very complex. Doesn't happen automatically. It happens at the rate that you allow it. And so it isn't so much an end goal or finish line, it's the beginning and a shift in perspective and growth mindset for future stressor events that come. Basically preparing yourself, right? It's not, and they make a very big point of this, it's not a placebo effect, meaning if you think it works for you, but at the end of the day, it really doesn't. It's like the exact, it functions like a placebo effect, only the fact that it works. And the only difference is that it's like a reverse negative placebo. The people who think it don't work, it doesn't work for them. But the people who think that it do work, it actually can. And the people who think it doesn't work, it actually might end up working for them, they don't even realize it. And so there is empirical data. It is real for you if it's real for you, because you're the only person at the end of the day who should be in the driver's seat of building your life story and setting your reality for how you engage people. You should be in the driver's seat with that. What trauma does is it takes us out of the driver's seat, right? And so being able to say, no, I am in control of this. That is where post-traumatic growth really starts. It's when you think that you don't have any control over it, is that you're not able to actually move forward whatsoever. And so the uniqueness, complexity, and requirements of it, again, it's unique in typical recoveries from trauma in that it actually might require persistent stress to be there to serve as a catalyst for motivating you, right? So like when I think about like my dad's death, post-traumatic growth doesn't say, we're not talking about it. It's no, I'm gonna remember it regularly. That's gonna actually be the fuel that goes into the place that causes me to grow, because it will be the thing that makes me want to grow the most, because I wanna grow out of this more than anything else in my life. So that's where it's unique, is that it actually requires there to be some stress, right? You can't throw the pain away. Right? Post-traumatic growth occurs when we can give the experienced trauma value. When we're able to actually say, I'm grateful for this, when we learn to appreciate and not prefer. That's a really big distinction. Appreciate, not prefer the new normal. We never have to prefer it, we can learn to appreciate it and what it offers and where the stage that we're at. And here's the really difficult part, and this is where it's like, I don't mind just being blunt in how I present it. The evidence shows that typically post-traumatic growth precedes improvements to physical health. And so basically, in other words, if you want to get better externally, you gotta clean up internally first. Most people, the evidence is overwhelming. It's not until you deal with what's inside that the outside starts to actually reflect a little bit what's inside. Shouldn't be too surprising. All right, so how it happens. Then we'll get to the pictures. It's a result of being able to take new information, especially toxic stressors, to your assumptive world, effectually and intellectually grasp it, right? You can ignore toxic stress and trauma, and it will go away for a time. All of us know what that's like, especially when we get caught up in that solution cycle we talked about. You can make trauma go away with your drinking. You can make trauma, pain and suffering go away with your drug use. You can, all those things for a time. But the difference is that if we don't ever confront it, if we always ignore it and throw it away, then growth will be delayed or never happen. So it's a matter of, do you want to grow out of this? You can stay in survival mode, that's totally fine. But what we showed last week, that probably means you're going to die 20 years earlier. And no one wants that, right? We want you to be healthy, we want you to grow. And there's 3 ways we can learn how to do this, okay? And so you can flip the page. There's 3 ways this happens, okay? There's strength through suffering. The motto, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Okay? It's true. It genuinely is true. And it sounds like I didn't know I had it in me to survive this. When you realize that, it's powerful. There was a rape victim who actually used this quote, who said, you know, what I found is that I survived through it, and what that person tried to do to me was break me. Break my will, break my power, and I realized I'm stronger than I thought I was, because it didn't break me. I was able to survive. I was able to grow out of it. And so, as much as we feel like that sometimes seems like a hallmark sentiment, it's a really important cognitive ability and thought to have if we actually do want to grow. You are stronger than the pain and suffering that you've experienced. And it looks like and feels like just a new evaluation of the self, right? Okay, I'm a little bit tougher than I thought I was, and I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that things could be worse, but right now it's not as bad as it could be. And just having that perspective alone allows us to start going into those lifestyle or those behavioral pattern changes that we didn't have access to before. Second one is psychological preparedness. So that's where I was saying don't say no to that voice, because the motto is it can literally come and go as it pleases. It can affect me at any moment, and it can happen to me, and I'm not going to trick myself into thinking that it can't. Because that same girl that I chatted with you about, the first thing I said to her, I thought long and hard about what I wanted to say to her the first time, because my dad was killed unexpectedly and early too. First thing I just said to her was, hey, welcome to the Dead Dads Club. Like, you never thought you were going to be here, I bet, but now we're both sitting here. And she said that actually felt good, just to be able to say, like, yeah, I didn't think it could happen, but now I'm here. And just even having that awareness that, yeah, my whole life can fall apart at any moment. You don't want to functionally live with that, but you want to live with the awareness that it could. And just living with that awareness helps us to not have trauma take such an effect. Third one, what it can look like and feel like. It's just a change in our assumptive world and thinking. It's having an Ecclesiastes view of life. No, good people don't always prosper. Wicked people don't always pay the price. Sometimes it's the exact opposite. And I need to learn to not assume things that the world doesn't give to me automatically. We talked about this, rebuilding it from the ground up for protection, right? It's not doing it for anything other than to say, I don't want to be caught. And again, psychological, this is the pre. Strength through suffering is the reactive. Psychological is, all right, it's happened, so how do I prepare for it next? And then think about like taking antibiotics. Psychological preparedness, and that's where I say don't stop that thought process. Allow it to come in so that your mind can process and practice it, and so when it really comes, it knows what to do. And it knows how to respond, and it knows how to emotionally regulate properly. One of my favorite quotes, trauma is just a massive case of expectancy disconfirmation. Right? Trauma, basically, in other words, trauma happens when we least expect it to happen. So, and by definition, so if we can expect it to happen, then it's not always a bad thing. It's just to the degree of which we allow the expectation of it to happen to shape the way that we actually engage with the world. And then the last one is existential reevaluation. Everything happens for a reason. And it sounds like everything is a gift to me in light of what I know can be lost. So you know what? It sucks. I don't like this. It's painful. It's hurtful. But I know what I can lose, and I got to believe this is happening for a reason, because if it's not, then what's the point of all this, right? And it looks like saying, hey, I'm going to make meaning out of this. And there's 2 types of meaning, right? There's meaning as comprehensibility. How? Why? Right? Just trying to even understand and fathom how this is my new reality and trying to make meaning out of it that way but the meaning we want is meaning of significance, right? How can this be used to add value to my life? What can this teach me? What possible good can I take out of this? And that is a genuine existential reevaluation, because we don't want to think that way. We want to just go, no, we don't want this to happen. But to be able to take a moment and say, how does my dad's death benefit me? And it doesn't have to happen the day after. Probably should happen 5 to 6 years after, or maybe 2 to, it doesn't happen the day after. But again, post-traumatic growth usually takes place years after. And this is, so we'll take a break right after this in terms of just like regathering thoughts and have questions. But again, I'm a pastor, so these are the stories I know the best, because he had a blessed life, right? He was wealthy, family, land, he had it all. That's everything he had, and I know that you're like, boy, what, 500 donkeys. Back then, that was a big deal, right? Have 500 donkeys. This is the oldest story that was ever written in the Bible, in terms of like when it was actually documented and put into. So this, I mean, Job had everything. He's Elon Musk of his day, right? And it was all taken away in an instant. Everything that he had, completely taken away. All he's left with is his boils, his scabs, and his family dies. Everything completely left in ruin. But here's the thing. He never just pretends it didn't happen. He gives it to God. He lets him know, you suck. I hate this. I've done nothing wrong. And he has the most honest conversation with God that is available in probably any religious text, of just like, you need to make this make sense to me. And he does. He's able to wrestle through it with God, and then eventually Job is given back all that he lost. Now, for the traumatized people in this room, is that good news? To get back all that you've lost and maybe a little more?
So you can lose it again? No.
No, that literally, that is the true lesson of Job, is that's when the real faith begins. Because now you know what you can lose. You know what can be taken away. Oh, I thought it was like when my dad was killed when I was 18, my biological dad showed up a year later out of nowhere, introduced himself to me for the first time in my life on Facebook, over a really small conversation. And he came and visited me, and then he drove home and almost died of a massive heart attack. And I remember saying out loud to my wife, no more dads. I'm done with it. Like, I don't want them in my life. I don't need it. Like, I don't need this pain in my life. And so this is what makes Job say, look, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Right? That's existential reevaluation. Like, I'm not in control. The only thing I control is my response to what is taking place. Talked about this a lot. Trauma is a script. More we're able to identify it, greater chance we have at providing proper, adequate intervention. But we don't just want to intervene. What we want to do is anticipate where it has the greatest probability of impact and destruction before it happens, so that 1, we can reduce collateral damage at all costs, but 2, increase the probability that we'll actually grow out of it instead of experiencing damaging stress. And the best way for you to do that is to prepare yourself for anticipation by knowing yourself and the immediate environment that you are engaging. First is identity development by Erickson. Maybe if any of you guys have done any studies in psychology, you may be aware of this, but he was concerned with how does one form the self, right? It's like scaffolding, right? There's a ground plan to build on, but from that ground plan, different sort of parts arise, levels arise, and then over time, all the parts arise to have this functional oneness to it, right? And so we're not just ourself, and then we're not just complete picture, and then it changes throughout our life. It's, we're building constantly through each stage of life. We build one season at a time, and there's ultimately 8 total stages, and in each one of these stages, what we have is a crisis to confront, and then an element of the ego, the self, that is most dominant and active. And this is why, if we know this, what I would say is most trauma in our childhood and our adulthood, especially when it comes to identity formation, is a result of the crisis that we are dealing with. That is what gets threatened. It's not, because if that is the crisis we're having to resolve in that age stage, if that gets confronted or if that gets damaged, then it can create a really big issue, right? And so in infancy, this is kind of all stuff that I think we might know intrinsically, but it's helpful to just say it out loud. In infancy, right, our biggest crisis is trust versus mistrust. That's the most fundamental requisite of mental health. Can I trust the people that are taking care of me? If an infant is cared to by a faithful caretaker, then they learn that the world is a hospitable place. But if they're deprived, then it sets the stage for mistrust, right? And so this is why fatherless is devastating. And moms too, but I mean, so really what the biggest strength of ego here is hope. I want someone to take care of me. Please just, let me be taken care of. And in early childhood, so this is about 2 to 3 years, toddler, how old is he?
He's 2.
Yep, so you're probably going to understand this one a lot. It's autonomy versus shame and doubt, right? Now that you know how to relate to the ice, you feel free to explore it. And the element of ego strength is will. Mine, my way, let me do it. Parents just can't let their kids walk out into the street, but they can't keep them in the nest either, because that's when shame and doubt start to take shape, because if their will is not allowed to be enacted, well, what good is life, right? I need to be able to learn how to have autonomy versus just being kept inside all the time. Stage 3, we've got the preschool age, 4 to 5, which the crisis is initiative versus guilt. Is it safe to initiate action, or am I going to be reminded of how poor I am at completing my purpose? And what we have is purpose as the functional will thing. So that is, what am I going to do? Who am I? What am I here for? What type of person might I become? So you start to think about this. Think about your life. What happened from 0 to 5? What part of your hope, what part of your will, and what part of your purpose was compromised? That sets the stage for a lifetime of who you will become and who you see yourself and what type of parent you become as well. School age, 6 to 12, industry versus inferiority. How do you play? How do you pay attention to your kid? How do you pay attention and give time? And tell your kids how valuable they are to you and to the world. Are they interesting to you? How will the world interest them? And really what they're concerned about here is competence. Can I do it? Am I capable? Am I able? And they need people, especially in that 6 to 12 years of life, parents, yes, you are capable. You're good at this. Stage 5 is adolescence. 12 to 18. Identity versus identity confusion. Looking for men and ideas to have faith in. I'm looking for something to trust, who and what I should trust, but doesn't discern well, right? So fidelity, who am I going to be faithful to? Who's faithful to me? Who am I going to hitch my wagon to? Because this is the part of life where they start to realize mom and dad aren't as cool as I thought they were when I was 2 years old, right? Now they're kind of lame. They don't know a lot as much as they think that they know. I kind of know some things better than them, so I'm going to try and find some fidelity. I'm going to find my hope. I'm going to find an external support system and start my life, because then it goes into young adulthood. And think about the young adults that we have who did not find people to say, I'm gonna try and be like that, emulate and now what we have, a lot of lost young adults who have no idea what to chase after or go after. But again, if it's damaged during that time in identity, you can't blame them. Young adulthood, what we have is intimacy versus isolation, right? It's much broader and deeper than just sex. It's how do you give and receive affection. And you think about, me doing young adult ministry right now in the 19 to 28, can't tell you how many young women come in who have been victim of sexual assault. That's the question right there that is almost impossible for them to answer in a healthy way, of how do I give and receive affection, intimacy. How do you lose and or find yourself in another, right? You can't love your neighbor if you don't love yourself. You can't say I love you until you know who I am, until you love yourself. And so really the biggest thing is love from 19 to 28. That's what I'm trying to find. Middle adulthood, we have generativity versus self-stagnation or absorption. Are you creating, this is from 28 to 40. Are you creating or taking? Are you serving or being served? Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. All right, it's this idea of care. How am I taking care of the things that are around me? Are you able to reach beyond yourself? And then the last stage we have is maturity. and that's later adulthood, 51 on. The crisis is between integrity versus despair. Have I been faithful to my values? And what wisdom I have sustained in the process. Midlife crisis happened during reflection during this time. If they realize they have not been faithful, and so they want to be able to pass on wisdom. They want to acquire wisdom. They want to be able to use that wisdom. These are the things, and so again, we think about all those, and I give you multiple different graphics and ways of looking at it, but if you just think about this, my 2 and my 3-year-old, that's all they want to do right now, is mine, 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 mine. For me to lose my crap on that every single time is not a good idea. And it might, for them, create suffering in their life. They don't want that. Actually might create a traumatic event. Same thing when they're 6 and 12. I'm going to have a different battle to deal with them. And so for you, for people with young kids or grandkids, this is how you can kind of know, like, yeah, of course he's going to want to do his things his own way. He's 2 and 3. Of course, next stage he's going to want to do this, because that's how we develop and grow ourselves. So I want to show a video afterwards that I think will really make the parents in the room a little misty-eyed, or if it doesn't, then don't feel bad, but it always happens to me. Cognitive development, this is Piaget. Cognitive means to become acquainted with, to know, to process information. It focuses on how we process information over the span of our lives, right? Remember from last week, that's what gets affected the most from trauma. It's your ability to take in information and process it properly. So it's a really big deal that we understand what the stages are here. Healthy cognitive development allows the individual's brain to effectively store old information so that it can be recovered and actually used to benefit later on in life. So you can see some of the examples that are on your paper, but sensor motors from 0 to 2, right, uses their senses to understand the world around them. That's water, okay? Or water's wet. They don't necessarily conceive of what is water just quite yet, right? But then you got pre-operational, which is from 2 to 7. Language development takes place. Children start using dual reasoning. So think about this, the adverse childhood experiences. Most of the toxic adverse childhood experiences happen from 2 to 7. Most of them. And so what is being affected the most? Your ability to communicate. Your ability to actually use language as a tool for you to let people know how you're feeling. And to reason well. So that's why it's, and so even if you're not a parent of someone in this age, I had that second note for like why it's important to know these things. I can tell you so many things that got damaged for me from 2 to 7. And even having an awareness of when it took place and what got damaged allows me to be like, okay, that's what I got to start working on. I need to start working on the fact that I need to trust people more because it got damaged here. And I need to make sure I don't inflict that exact same pain on my kids. Concrete operational, 7 to 12, start understanding the world around them through concrete reasoning, but abstract reasoning is still not present at this age. The one that I gave you, I really liked the example, like the water, right? It's the sensory motor, it's the kid who's just, oh, water's wet, or this is in front of me. Second stage is, oh, he has water. He's able to identify that. The third one is, which one is, okay, this doesn't look like the same amount. One looks bigger than the other. And then the other person, without even holding the water in that last stage, is able to go, okay, it's half full or it's half empty, right? We start to actually put everything that we've learned in these first 3 stages into a cohesive thought without actually having to interact with it. And again, you might think it's boring, but think of the most jacked up people that you know in your life have a really hard time doing this whole water thing. Defining reality, right? When we talk about some people in our lives go, am I the only person that sees that the sky is blue? Am I the only person that sees, like that there is some sensorimotor pre-operational things that have been affected that it's hard for people to see reality as it is. All right, here we go. Moral development, these last 2 are the quickest. How does what we just talked about, how does cognitive growth or damage impact our ability to reason morally? How does cognitive development impact our view of right and wrong? There's a case study. Is it right or wrong for a father to steal for his starving family? Yes or no?
Oh, I read that wrong.
Is it okay if his family is starving and they're going to die? Is it okay for him to steal?
Yeah, that's fine.
Well, guess what? He wasn't interested in your answer. What he was interested in is why you gave the answer you did. What made you say yes or no? or maybe, right? He was interested in the developmental change that occurs when one's moral choices are shaped less by external factors, i.e. the trauma, and what happens when they're shaped more by internal values, an internal compass that doesn't allow pain and suffering and stress to change that compass. And what they found was there's really 6 sort of like steps. There's 3 steps. There's pre-conventional, 3 to 7. Doesn't even take place until you get to 3 for moral stuff, obviously. Conventional is 8 to 13, and post-conventional is adulthood. And I would encourage you to read on some of the stuff that I have there already. I'm just trying to pay attention of the time. But I'll just go over the 6 from avoiding punishment and all those things. So from 3 to 7, the first stage, right, is punishment obedience orientation. It's the lowest of all stages of moral reasoning. It's basically, will I be punished or not? And again, how many people who are in such active, deep, ongoing trauma live right here? Of just, this is the only moral reason I have. Am I going to get caught? Am I going to get punished? Well, that will decide whether I do it or not. Stage 2, instrument relative orientation. At this stage, the child determines right and wrong by reasoning whether the actions are instrumental in satisfying their wants or desires. We know a lot of 20, 30, 40-year-old, 2-year-olds that, that operate out of that. Is it going to make me feel good? Is it going to make my life better? The good boy attitude. Right and wrong is determined by the desire to gain approval and acceptance of others. Doesn't matter if that acceptance is coming from a good place or if it's good affirmation. It's just the affirmation given is what motivates that behavior. Next is law and order, right? Right or wrong correspond to doing one's duty. You're going to do your duty, and that's all you're going to do. Like, this is what's required of me in a functional society. Then you get the social contract, legalistic orientation. The young adolescent realizes that law is for the benefit of the common good and should be taken seriously. But anything that has been determined by social contract can also be reconfigured. So we can change it if we need to. But for the most part, I'm going to do what I'm called to do. And then there's the last part, which is the universal ethical principle, which is law is still important, but there's higher values that still deserve our human allegiance. If the law tells you to harm your family intentionally, you're not going to do it. And so we can be at a different stage in every different trauma in our lives. But again, where this is important for you is when you think about your life, what's motivating the reasons you do what you do? Even if there's trauma that's being brought into your life willingly, by the decisions you're making, is it because you're operating out of self-interest? Are you operating out of avoiding punishment? Yeah, I'm going to keep doing this, I just don't want to get caught. Is that the only reason why you're not doing it? It's because you don't want to get caught. Well, guess what? We're never going to, that is a 3 and 7-year-old way of thinking. we're not going to grow. We have to start getting higher and higher up here, especially with young kids. It's recognized, have a lot of patience in that 3 to 7, because yeah, they are just avoiding punishment. They don't know right from wrong. You do, they don't. And then the last one, I showed this to you last week, so I don't need to spend a lot of time. Ecological systems development. Basically, what this whole thing is it's basically saying formation isn't happening in a vacuum. You have an ecology of space. Any foreign objects inserted changes the ecology. If I were to take that hand sanitizer and dump 3 things in here, there's not a reality that exists where I can now separate the hand sanitizer from the water. It's a totally different substance. And we need to realize the same with trauma. And where the ecological systems thing is, and I get as a white 30-year-old middle-class Christian with a beautiful family, it's really easy for me to say it all starts in the home. Good parenting, that's what you got to do, and that fixes everything. Well, no, because guess what? That's the start of it, because you've got your local religious communities. So there's these 4 or 5 different things that surround a kid, and especially in our context where we've got, 96 countries represented at East Kentwood alone? That is a cultural, just a total melting pot. And so, that's going to affect you. You can't just ignore, shelter from, or downplay the influence of cultural and external systems. If you are living closer to streams than you are from Caledonia and Ada, you're going to have a different go at life. It's just, if you're living in this trailer park and not Crystal Springs, you're going to have a different experience. There's going to be different systems around you that are going to make growth better or easier or more difficult. And I share that video just to say, hey, that's how it should be. That's what it's supposed to be like. It's supposed to be sad. It's supposed to be difficult. It's supposed to be something that we don't expect. It's supposed to change that quickly. And for a lot of us, maybe, we didn't have that as kids. Doesn't mean that you can't provide that for someone else. Doesn't mean that you can't be a healthy person. And more than anything, it just goes to show even healthy people, there's a lot of goodness in that, but you could already tell some of the parent heartaches of just like, oh, I don't like that, it's not fun, I want to deal with this. But it's our kids more than anyone else in this world are looking towards us to be the people that give them an example of healthy emotional regulation, of how to deal with stress properly, of how to not just say forget about it, but to deal with it appropriately and healthy. So this is where I get so excited, because our next time you get to meet, what does each incremental step of growth look like as you recover, heal from, and grow out of a traumatic event? And I quite literally mean that. No matter what situation it is, I have a document that I call the scales of trauma. And there it goes from -10 to +10. -10 is it just happened, or there's active ongoing repression, and +10 is gratitude for this event. What does each step of growth look like? But additionally, what type of care is required for each individual step? Because you don't put bandages on amputations. You don't go start picking scars with stitch needles, right? Like, it's important that we understand where people are at. We'll talk about that. How can you identify the next step in growth for you and for the people that you love in your life? And then, we'll be talking about the scales of trauma. And so I can tell you right now, this is my favorite one to talk about.
Fabulous.
Thank you guys for coming, truly.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.